Tonight's breaking news, the Associated Press reporting that President Obama has rejected all of the options given to him on the way forward in the war in Afghanistan. Any decision he makes about Afghanistan will, of course, have to take into account our frenemy across the border in Pakistan. And as Seymour Hersh details in this week's New Yorker magazine, U.S. dealings with Pakistan, specifically on the issues of fighting the Taliban and keeping that country's nuclear arsenal out of the hands of militants, they're going from complicated to full-on Gordian knot territory. Joining us now is Seymour Hersh, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. Mr. Hersh, thanks very much for coming on the show tonight.
Sure.
Before we talk Pakistan, I do need to ask your reaction to this breaking news from the Washington Post and the AP tonight that the U.S. ambassador in Afghanistan, Karl Eikenberry, now says don't send more troops now because of Afghan corruption, and the president tonight reportedly rejecting all of the options that have been presented to him for sending more troops.
Well, look, it could be huge. It's very early, but it could be huge, simply that the president's finally saying, I'm taking control. The one thing that mystified a lot of people, a lot of my friends on the inside, was his decision to let General McChrystal write a report. We always compare Mr. Obama to President Lincoln, but Lincoln did not let George McClellan write a report on how to win the war against the South. There's no general in history that will come back, given that assignment, and say we can't win. This is basically a war at best that's going to be a stalemate, a 10-year stalemate, X thousands and X the money, etc. And so Obama is just putting his foot down, and that's great. He's saying he's making a political gamble in a sense. It's a little too early to say, but he's grabbing it. He's grabbing it, and he hasn't been grabbing it until now.
On the issue of Karl Eikenberry's cables back to Washington from the embassy in Kabul, we heard Ann Guerin, the AP reporter tonight, say that decision seemed to her to be out of the blue, totally unexpected. What do you know about Karl Eikenberry, and how surprised are you by that decision?
Oh, this is trouble in River City. This is big news because Eikenberry, I'll tell you, the top of the Army, General George Casey, the Chief of Staff, they've been very unhappy with the McChrystal appointment and the way things have been going. And part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of people in the Army see a West Point cabal. There's always this notion of a West Point mafia. Eikenberry was a couple years ahead, 73, class of 73. McChrystal, his deputy, Rodriguez, Petraeus, Odiano, they're all either 74 or 75. They've all been together and causing a lot of trauma inside the Army, which is very resentful. The man that was kicked out, General McKernan, was William and Mary, was not a West Pointer. This is one of the sub-rosa stories, as I've been talking to people for the last 8-9 months about, obviously, not only Pakistan, but Afghanistan. This is, for Eikenberry to split, I did know that this summer, inside the embassy and inside the community, there was a lot of concerns about the stability, literally the mental stability of Karzai. And I think Eikenberry probably knows more than most people. This also might explain why Dick Holbrooke, the special advisor or consultant, has had so much trouble with him. There's a lot of deep-seated problems with Karzai, and Eikenberry is simply, I think, reflecting a huge split because he's now splitting from the McChrystal, the counterinsurgency wing that's been dominated by Petraeus. If my guess on this, my heuristic guess on this is right.
We've got looming over both the worry about increasing the size of America's military footprint in Afghanistan and also the worry about U.S. troops pulling out of Afghanistan, the stability of Pakistan. And you write in the New Yorker this week that American and Pakistani officials have an understanding that in the event of a crisis, Americans would be allowed to provide some added security for Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Pakistani officials denying that, of course, on the record. How much access do you think the U.S. would have to Pakistan's nukes in a crisis?
Well, we've had a lot more than we talk about. It's been an ongoing process. You notice that the Pentagon isn't saying much because Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chief, who I find to be a very straight arrow, has been on the record publicly for months. Twice in May, he talked openly about how much we're doing to help the Pakistanis with nuclear security. It's a huge issue for us. The reason you write a story like this, theoretically, why would you want to write a story about the fact that we're getting some access in a very sensitive area? We're very worried about a terrorist or a jihadist or a Taliban, I'm not sure who does what there, getting access to a warhead, a loose nuke, if you will. That's always been the Islamic bomb, a nightmare. But the truth is, that the reason you do this story is because when you get deep into it and you go to Pakistan and you start talking to people involved, you find out, as far as they're concerned, oh, you Americans, we have to just make you happy. We tell you what we want and tell you what we think you want to know. They take these kind of agreements far less seriously than we do. And the fact of the matter is that we really don't know what we need to know. It's great that we get more access, and we have gotten more access, but that doesn't mean in any way that we can feel secure about what's going on there. It's their weapon systems. They say they're in control. We dream and talk about taking them out, but that's not going to be possible. There's 80 or 100 of them. And so we just are pretending. We're telling each other, well, we've got more access. I think it's a serious issue that's very much going to stay unresolved for a long time.
And in your interview with former Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf, he says that Pakistan has constructed a huge tunnel system to make it impossible for anyone, including us, to monitor the transportation and storage of all of Pakistan's nukes. Are they doing that specifically to keep that information from us because they think that we'll tell India about their arsenal?
Well, that's always the irrational fear, or the rational fear of the Pakistanis feel that we love India more than we love them, and the Indians, of course, I was also in Delhi on this story, they feel the same thing. Why do we love Pakistan more than they? And so you always have that problem. In fairness to Musharraf, I brought up the issue of tunnels because, naturally, as a former president, he was reluctant. Musharraf had been very helpful after 9/11 about the nuclear arms, and this is when Secretary Powell was in the government, Secretary of State, and his deputy, Rich Armitage. There was a great deal of information passed then that was reassuring up to a point. We've always had our nose into it, clearly not as much as the Indians, but I did bring up the tunnels for two reasons. Somebody, actually a nuclear physicist, a Pakistani, said to me, one reason we have these tunnels is obviously for security, to make sure they can't be hit by an Indian bomb, but he also said that keeps Big Uncle, that's us, with great sarcasm, keeps Big Uncle, our satellites, from getting a look-see at what we're doing. We don't like Big Uncle watching us all the time. So one of the reasons the tunnels were built and constructed, we moved, the Pakistanis moved their warheads around and their triggers around and their delivery systems around, some of them underground, is to keep it from us, of course.
Documenting the illusion of our influence in the most frightening possible terms. Seymour Hersh, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, whose article Defending the Arsenal in this week's New Yorker is a page-turner and a must-read. Mr. Hersh, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.